Shalom uvracha. In the Siddur, we refer to Pesach as Zman Cherusenu, the time, the season of our freedom. Shavuos we refer to as Zman Matan Torasenu, the time, the season of the giving of our Torah. Sukkot is referred to as Zman Simchasenu, the time, the season of rejoicing. We know from the Bali Musar, from the Sifrei Chassidus, that these names aren't because of a one-time event. Pesach is not called the season of our freedom because we went out of Egypt. Rather, there is an energy, there's a hashpah in the time, which is why it is then that we went out of Egypt. So rather, the going out of Egypt is a symptom, is an indication that this is the time of our freedom. Zman Matan Torasenu, again, the giving of the Torah then was an indication that there's a hashpah, there's an energy of giving of Torah, which is why Matan Torah happened then. So one would like to understand, what is the big simcha, the rejoicing connected with Sukkot? We can also know the famous question, why is it that if we are sitting in a sukkah, ki b'sukkos yeshavti es b'nei Yisrael, I had b'nei Yisrael dwelling in sukkahs when they went out of Egypt, machlokes in Chazal, whether it was the actual sukkah the way we know it, or it referred to the Ananei HaKoved, the clouds of glory. But the Meforshim ask, that happened when right away we went out of Egypt, so it should be already Pesach time we have the sukkah. Why are we waiting till Tishrei? The classic answer given is that it needs to stand out that we are doing it l'shem mitzvah, for the purpose of a mitzvah. And Pesach time, it's summer, it's hot, it's a pleasure being out. People sit in their gazebo, enjoying the heat. So Chazal, the Rebbeinu Shalom, pushed it up to Tishrei that it should stand out and be noticeable. But we will reflect and give a different answer. There is a Rosh in Perik Lulav and when he discusses why is it that we do na'anuim, we shake the lulav, also in Ana Hashem Hoishiana. Why do we do na'anuim then also? So he quotes a medrash. He says, in Rosh Hashanah bo'im ledin, we come to be judged on Rosh Hashanah. Yisrael ve'uma soilom, Am Yisrael and the nations of the world. And we do not know mi yatzah zakai, who came out clean from the court case, and who came out guilty, culpable from the court case. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave a mitzvah to Yisrael, shu smeichim b'luleveim. They need to rejoice with their lulev, like a person that has walked out victorious from a court case, that he is happy. This is what is said in the verse, Oz yirananu atzei hayar, then the trees of the forest will rejoice. The Rosh explains that we will rejoice with the trees of the forest. What do we mean by Zakai, coming out victorious from the court case? There is a pasuk we say in Hallel, Ohavti ki yishma Hashem et koili tachanunai. I love Hashem because he hears the voice of my request. Ki hita oznoi li. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu inclined his ear to me. Rav Hutner Zichreinu Livracha asks, it would seem that the verse is out of order. Ordinarily, when you are going before a higher authority to make a request, the natural sequence is you go over, he maybe leans over to hear what you have to say, and then he ponders on your request and answers the request. But here, the verse says, Ahavti Yishma Hashem et koili tachanunai. I'm delighted, I love that the Ribono Shel Olam is listening to me, and only then does it say, Kihita oznoi li, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has inclined his ear to me. Rav Hutner explains, we find by the Yam Suf, we have a scenario with the sea in front of us, the Egyptians behind us. Things couldn't be worse. So Am Yisrael, Tofsu Umnas Aviseim, they do what a Yid knows to do, and they daven. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, Ma titzak elai. Why are you davening? Darel b'nei Yisrael v'yaso. Tell the Jewish people, move on, go ahead. The Maharal explains that be'emtza tefillah lo hayanane, that while they were davening, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would not have granted their request. Question is, what's wrong? Why not? Explains Rav Hutner with a parable of Chazal. Mashal lamad dover doiveh. What is this similar to? A nobleman once saved a princess from a band of thieves. He tried later on to get her attention, to strike up a relationship, and she was playing hard to get at. So what did he do? He set up an attack from thieves, fake thieves obviously, and then she called out to him for help, and that's the way he got her attention. Chazal are showing us that when we have an Eis Tzara, when Chalila, we are in a situation of difficulty and we daven, it's not that, oh, we're in a situation of difficulty, oh, the thing to do is daven. But we have to realize we were put in that situation of difficulty because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to turn to him, to daven to him. So being that now we were davening and the purpose of the tzara was being fulfilled, while it was being fulfilled, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't take away the tzara. Says Rav Hutner, so when we are savoring the moment, when we are appreciating the process, it's not only the fulfillment of our request, but the main pleasure, what we really savoring is that we have come closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the indication is that he has fulfilled our request. That is, Ohavti ki yishma Hashem es koili tachanunai. I'm delighted that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has fulfilled my request, which is step A. But the real purpose is, ki hito ozno li. He has become closer to me. He has inclined himself to me. If we are to take this one step further, we questioned before, how come Sukkot is celebrated in Tishrei? Surely it would make sense if we are commemorating B'Sukkos Yeshavti B'nei Yisrael, when I took them out of Egypt, let's do it Pesach time. Explains the Gra in Shir HaShirim. He says that we lost the Ananei HaKoved, the clouds of glory, when we did the Chet HaEgel. Let's recall, Chazal tell us, by Matan Torah we had reached the point of Adam Arishan prior to the Chet, and the Shechina was down with us. When we did the Chet HaEgel, we lost the Ananei HaKoved. Only once the process of the Mishkan was back in place did we get the Ananei HaKoved. So says the Goyen, on Yud Aleph Tishrei, Moshe Rabbeinu made the big announcement, we're going to be building a Mishkan. On Yud Beis and Yud Gimel, people started bringing the gifts for the Mishkan. On Yud Daled Tishrei, that is when the people in charge started organizing all the gifts that were brought, and the actual building of the Mishkan started on Tesvav. That is when we got the Ananei HaKoved back. So we are celebrating the Ananei HaKavod we got back after having lost them. It's not the original Ananei HaKavod we had that we are celebrating. That was Ein Achinami when we left Egypt. We are celebrating the Ananei HaKavod we got back. When was that? Tesvav Tishrei, Sukkot. That is why we celebrate Sukkot in Tishrei, not in Nisan with Pesach. But what do we see from this Goyen? We see that we're at a height of Adam Rishon Koydem Achet. We had the Ribono Shel Olam, we had Hashras HaShechina, we had the Ananei HaKavod, and then bang, we did the Cheder Egel. It all was lost. We did Tshuva. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Salachti Kidvarecha. We got it all back. When? When we started the process of building the Mishkan. Very often reflected in Nefesh HaChaim, how our actions, our Maisim Tovim, bring the Shechina in the world, and the real Mishkan and Mikdash is Am Yisrael as a klal. So what do we have? So we have a coming closer to the Ribono Shel Olam. We have going back to what we had lost and regaining it. There's a very powerful drasha from Reb Chaim Volozhiner that he gave before Slichus. And he describes what fear, what trepidation a Yid needs to have going into Rosh Hashanah. He describes how scary it is to go before a king, anybody, but he says all the more so the treasurer who embezzled, and all the more so the trusted treasurer who embezzled and gave over the funds to the enemy. That is the sense we need to have going into Rosh Hashanah. So there's a natural feeling, there's a natural sense. We're going in to be judged. We're going to be held accountable for things we've stepped out of line. And we are human. Ein adam sheyaseh tov v'lo yechto. No such thing as not stepping out of line. So there's a natural sense, I've lost the closeness, I'm distant, I'm no longer liked. Therefore, when we come out of a Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, what greater cause for celebration when HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands us, V'samachta lifnei Hashem Elokecha shivas yomim. You will rejoice in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu 7 days. I want to rejoice together with you. True, you maybe blew it, but we are now back to where we started. It's not all lost, it's not gone. I want you, lifnei v'samachta, rejoice, be happy, lifnei Hashem Elokecha. There is Toimed Dvoiro from Rav Moshe Chaim Cordovero, and I'd like to read his Lashon. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu misnaeg b'midas basav adam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't interact with us like flesh and blood interacts with each other. Sh'im hechisoi chaveruk shu misratzi imoi, misratzi ma'at lo ka'ava kodemes. When you have a fallout with a friend, with somebody you know, even if you've made up, it's not the same as before. But if a man has stepped out of line, done an avera and done tshuva, it's even bigger than before. As Chazal tell us, b'makom shebali tshuva imdim, tzadikim gemurim, eini tzadikim gemurim yacholim la'amoid. So Rabbi say, we've gone through Rosh Hashanah. We've gone through Yom Kippur. We may be scared. We've lost it. We've blown it. We know how we are with our fellow man, that if we've wronged each other, there's a certain distance, there's a certain discomfort. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'somachto lifnei Hashem Elokecha. Rashi says in Sheva Brachas, in Ksuvis Tavches, we finish the last Sheva Bracha with V'sameach chosen im hakala. Rashi says the previous bracha is HaKadosh Baruch Hu should gladden, the Chos and Kala with their needs. This last bracha is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bind the Chos and Kala al Yedei Simcha, through Simcha. Simcha joins, Simcha brings close. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, after everything is said and done, says, I want to come close. Rejoice before me, Shivas Yomim. So now we understand the Zman Simchosenu. A very good Yom Tov.
Why do people want to come to Ohr Somayach? Why should I be interested in my Judaism? Inside every Jew, however far they become estranged from the beliefs, the traditions, the knowledge of our fathers and our forefathers, there's that little pintalid that goes on glowing and glowing and glowing. It never goes out.
We want to introduce Jews to something which is their birthright just as much as it is ours.
The objective of Ohr Somayach is to give someone the fuel to carry them in a dynamic Jewish life for the rest of their lives.
We live in a world which is full of uncertainty and insecurity. Ohr Somayach aims to give as many people as we can reach out to the opportunity to find something to hold on to.
Finally, there were other people who I could talk to and ask the questions that I had been facing for years. I could have Rabbi at my fingertips who not only could help me literally with what I needed to know, but also could show me what it was like to lead a frum life, to have a kosher home.
Any question can be asked. The most foundational questions are encouraged and discussed.
I don't really have a Jewish background, and by don't really, I mean don't have a Jewish background. So I was nervous about getting to a yeshiva and opening up a page of Gemara in Hebrew, a language I didn't know. And I'm actually figuring out that even without a background, you can open it up, and in time, it works.
From complete beginner, novice, all the way through to the most religious, black hat wearing, like any yeshiva you'd find, and we all coexist under one roof, under the commonality that we're all Jewish.
You want to learn? This is the place. You want to grow? This is the place.
There are two different components to Chag HaSukkos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that every Yid is commanded to have two mitzvos during the holiday. One of the mitzvos is that we are commanded to sit in a sukkah, to live in a sukkah. As the language of the pasuk says, Basukkos teshvu shivas yamim. For 7 days, for the entire duration of the holiday, we are meant to live in the sukkah. As well, the Torah says, Ulakachtem lachem bayom harishon pri-eitz hadar. We are commanded to take the daled minim. There's a mitzvah for a person to take in their hands the Lulav, Esrog, Hadassim, and Aravos, specifically on the first day of Sukkot, and in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Beis HaMikdash, each of the 7 days of Sukkot as well. And the question is, what is the common denominator between the Sukkah and the Lulav and Esrog? What is the theme which connects them? In fact, in practice, there are different customs, different minhagim, about whether or not the mitzvah of the Lulav and Esrog should be fulfilled inside of the sukkah, or if particularly the opposite, the mitzvah is not to be fulfilled in the sukkah. It is an independent thing. And to this day, you will see Jews who will specifically go out to the sukkah with the Lulav and Esrog and make sure that they take it and combine it in synthesis with the sukkah. And there are Jews who look at the Lulav and Esrog as its own independent entity, its own mitzvah. It's unique, and therefore has nothing to do with the sukkah altogether. And the question is, what is the blend between them? How do we look at Sukkah and the Lulav and Esrog together? So the first theme which strikes us is agriculture. They both have to do with living in the outdoors and appreciating all of the beauty and the nuances that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us with nature. With the Lulav and Esrog, they are things that grow. They are things that can only grow with water that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us, which we are praying for during Sukkot. And they therefore highlight the importance of our connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the way that He sends us water that provides for us in nature. The Sukkah as well symbolizes the greatness of nature, because the schach, the covering over our heads that we sit inside the Sukkah, that too, the schach has to come from something which grows from the ground. It has to be something natural, a natural material that comes out of the ground that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us. So both the Lulav, the Esrog, and the Sukkah, they both combine the elements of nature in the way that we as Yidden relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But there's something much deeper. because the lulav and the esrog represent nature in its absolute perfection, the best that nature can absolutely produce. It's the pristine beauty of nature. And if we look at the language of the pasuk, pre-eitz hadar, that the fruit that we take, the esrog that we take, is meant to be beautiful. It has to be something which is perfect. And the perfection of the esrog and the beauty of the esrog is something which is highlighted extensively throughout the third parak of Sukkah, where the Gemara outlines for us all the various slight blemishes that can completely undermine the beauty for an esrog. So for example, when a person is purchasing an esrog today, it has to be inspected under microscopic view. You have to look for any possible trace of a blemish. And the smallest dot can theoretically, depending where it is located, but it can theoretically invalidate the whole thing. A person can sometimes be holding an esrog, and it seems to be good, but if it's not perfect, and it's not perfect in the most pristine way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us the produce that we have in agriculture, then that's not a representation of what it is that we'd like to shake. When we want to shake lulav and esrog, we want to take perfection. We want to take the best that nature has to offer. And if it's not the best that nature has to offer, then that's not the point of it. You know, the Medrash compares the lulav and esrog as like a banner. It's a banner, it's a symbol of pride that the Jew takes after the Yomim Noraim, after achieving atonement, and after being forgiven by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We wave the lulav and esrog as a sign of pride and joy. Look at what we have achieved. And with that, again, it makes sense. It's a sign of perfection. It's a sign of hadar. It's a time when we have to highlight how beautiful, how perfect everything is around us. But if we start and we move and we kind of contrast this to the sukkah, we notice that actually the exact opposite is true. While it is true that we are representing nature, and that nature is present in the schach, and that it has to be something which comes out of the ground, but it seems that the halacha does not want the best of nature inside of the sukkah. And to the exact opposite, we prefer having something which are scraps left on the ground. How do we know what is schach? So the Gemara tells us that we look at the pasuk. The pasuk says, when does a person celebrate Sukkot? We do it at the time that we gather in from the granary and from the wine press. What is the meaning of connection from when we gather in from the wine press and the granary? That is the time of Sukkot. So the Gemara tells us that it means that whatever scraps are left there on the floor after you're done harvesting and bringing in the things that you want for your house, the meaningful parts, the seeds, the wheat, the things that you're going to use, well, then there are scraps that are left there on the floor. The things that most people would discard, the things that most people don't ascribe any value to, the little shells, the little bit of hay, whatever it is that's left on the floor. That's bedavka, what you're supposed to use when you make a sukkah. The sukkah comes from the ability of to pick up the pieces on the bottom of the granary, to go to the wine press and see what everybody else would throw away and not even notice at all. We go inside that wine press and granary, we pick up all the scraps, and we place those on top of our heads. So here also, nature is coming into the sukkah. Nature is involved in the mitzvah, but it's the exact opposite. It's we want the scraps. We want to be able to pick those things up and sit under them. And that is specifically the way that the sukkah is made. It's made from the residue, from the leftovers, from the things that don't seem to have any inherent value. Most people would discard them. But the Yid picks them up and places them on top of his head and is able to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. So from that perspective, we see that sukkah and lulav represent two opposite ideas. Lulav represents the most beautiful thing, the perfection that a person can achieve. And what sukkah represents is the imperfection that a person is still able to pick up. That even when there are scraps that are lying on the floor, a human being can pick them up, can make meaning of them, place them over their head, and is able to live in such a condition. Taking this one step further, let's notice another contrast between the mitzvah of lulav and the mitzvah of sukkah. How long does it take to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav, and how long does it take to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah? The mitzvah of lulav is done in literally one moment. In fact, it takes so quick to achieve that the Gemara even struggles to figure out, when exactly are you going to make your bracha on the lulav? As soon as a person makes the bracha, they're expected to fulfill the mitzvah. But the problem is, as soon as I pick up the lulav, I've already done the mitzvah. It's immediate. As soon as you take them in your hands, you fulfill the mitzvah. It's a very complicated thing. Mida'agbe nafakbe, the Gemara says. As soon as you pick it up, you already did the whole thing. And we know it gets very complicated. What the Rishonim tell us practically what to do. We hold the esrog upside down, and then when we make the bracha, and then we flip it around. All of this shows us how easy it is to fulfill the mitzvah of lulav, and in 1 second, the whole thing is over. Lulav is very easy to achieve, but once it's done, it's over. You cannot continue to achieve the mitzvah of lulav. Lulav is not something which is ongoing. You take it and it's over. As soon as mida'agbe, as soon as a person places it in their hands, nafakbe, then that's it. The mitzvah is over. It's literally a 1 second mitzvah. In contrast, if you look at the mitzvah of Sukkah, Sukkah is something which is always there throughout the entire week of Sukkot. It's something which at every moment a person can theoretically be fulfilling. Oftentimes today we leave the Sukkah because we interrupt in the mitzvah. But theoretically, a person can make one bracha on the Sukkah in the beginning of Sukkot and stay in this Sukkah for the entire week, remain in that state of living in the Sukkah, and constantly, 24/7 for that week, he has been fulfilling the mitzvah of Sukkah on a constant basis. Every activity can theoretically be a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Sukkah. The eating, the drinking, the sleeping, the talking, the conversations, the leisure, all of that can be done in the Sukkah under the form of Pre-Sukkos Seishvu, that a person is commanded to sit and to live inside of the Sukkah. So here is another contrast. The mitzvah of Lulav is a moment. The mitzvah of Sukkah is a way of life. It's the ideal way of life where for Sukkot, a person is constantly inside of the Sukkah. But for Lulav, it's only a flash. It only comes for a moment and then it is gone. The mitzvah is already fulfilled. Perhaps we can explain that this contrast is representative of the same distinction that we highlighted earlier. Sukkah is the idea of imperfection. How a person can take scraps that are on the ground and elevate them and pick them up and live under those conditions. The Sukkah is the way of life. Life is not perfect. Life comes from our ability to pick up pieces, to tenaciously say that no matter what is left on the floor, there must be meaning in it. And even if there's no price tag and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but if HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent it to me, then there's something for me to pick up. And that's our way of living a life. Living life when not everything is correct, when not everything is perfect, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is challenging us. That's the idea of Sukkot. Sukkot is something which is ongoing. At any moment in life, there are always challenges. There are always imperfections. There are always failures. There are always things which seem to incessantly let us down. But at the same time, we know how to pick them up. The power of a yid who knows how to pick up those from what's left on the Goren and the Yekev, place it over his head, and make a life out of it. But a Lulav and Esrog, the moments of perfection, of course we highlight them. Of course we celebrate them. Of course we're proud of them. But we recognize that they are fleeting. We recognize that perfection is amazing, incredible, but very short-lived. And if our expectation is that I can hold the lulav the whole day, then we're going to be very disappointed in life because the flashes of perfection leave us very quickly. And here we are in Sukkot with these two themes. One is the challenge of perfection, to find beauty, to find the best that nature has to offer, but also to realize its limitation. To realize that for everything that you're so proud of inside of yourself that turned out just perfect, that one perfect thing, realize that it can be gone in a moment. Realize that it's going to have its shortcomings as well. But at the same time, we have the Sukkah where we live. We experience life. The regular life that we're looking at in the ideal throughout Sukkot is our ability to pick up the pieces, to know what it means to find meaning in the remains of as we make a life out of them. This is very reminiscent of the idea of Trumas Hadeshen. Inside of the Beis HaMikdash, the Avodah each and every day began by the Kohen taking a little bit of the remains of yesterday's ash, elevating them, picking them up, and placing them down next to the Mizbeach. Why is it that the Avodah each and every day begins with Trumas Hadeshen, with picking up ash? What is the depth of picking up ash? So that Mefarshim explain that ash represents that even when something is destroyed, even when there is a fire and something is consumed, something is lost, but there's always a scrap to pick up. There's always residue. There is always meaning which remains. Nothing is completely futile. Nothing is totally a waste. There's an art, it is a skill to know ba'aspecha, to know how to pick it up, to make meaning from those scraps. But that's specifically what Trumas Hadeshin is all about. When a person moves on from a day before, and undoubtedly the day before brought certain failures and shortcomings, the first thing that we have to do as we look forward is know how to pick up the ashes. Not just to say tomorrow is fresh, tomorrow is different, but to see the continuity. To see that yesterday's destructions, whatever weaknesses were found in yesterday's, that is exactly the ash of tomorrow. That is what is going to build tomorrow. And we find certain times in the Gemara that ash, ironically, is used as fertilizer. That's what makes something grow. That's what cultivates growth. Because specifically through looking at the remains of destruction, by picking those parts up, that is the way that we build. That is the way that we evolve, by seeing the ash as a means to build something in the future. And this has always been the hallmark of the Jewish people. In a way, it's the secret of our identity. That when the world looks at the ashes, and when the world sees what's left on the granary and the wine press, so the world doesn't see anything. The natural perception is that after something is destroyed and discarded, then it's meaningless. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu believes in us, and he says, no, as Yidden we know how to pick up. We know how to make meaning of what's left. We can pick up, we can be Meir Mes Hadeshen, and similarly it's Ba'aspecha Migarncho Mikvecha. We are able to make a life out of living inside of the Sukkah. As much as the Sukkah represents imperfection, it also shows us that there is such a depth and almost an ideal of knowing how to live with imperfection. Let's give an example. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that there were different Amoram who were discussing when Mashiach was going to come. And one Amora said, he said, when is Bar Nafli going to come? Bar Nafli means the one of the fallen one, the son of the fallen one. So the Gemara says, why is Mashiach referred to as Bar Nafli? So the Gemara quotes the idea that we recite this in the benching on Sukkot, that we refer Harachman Uyakim Lanu as Sukkas David Hanofales. We talk about the Sukkah of David HaMelech, which has fallen. We speak about the reign of David HaMelech, the great dynasty, the legacy, all of the kings. But it seems that it has fallen, and we dive into HaKadosh Baruch Hu to restore that Malchus, for the glory to come back, that the fallen kingdom should once again be able to stand. And that is Mashiach. Mashiach is the Bar Nafli. He is from the fallen kingdom. And we believe that one day Mashiach will be able to stand again. Maral explains that there's something very deep in the connection between the Sukkah and the fallen dynasty of David HaMelech. And he explains as follows. If somebody has a bias, if somebody builds something to be permanent, permanence is meant to be forever. It's meant to be eternal. And when I have something which is meant to be perfect, and I build the house with every last detail, and it is meant to endure everything, then the second that it falls, it is absolutely destroyed. When a house of permanence is gone, then it is gone forever. When something meant to be eternal is no longer eternal, then by definition it loses its value. But the Sukkah is different. The Sukkah is meant from the outset to be a temporary shelter, to be living in moments where I have what I have now and we will still see what is to come. When a Sukkah falls, it's not destroyed. It's fallen in the moment, but it knows that it can be picked up and put back together. It is so much easier to pick up a Sukkah which fell than to rebuild a house that was burned down. And we all understand that. To rebuild a house means to start from scratch. But if I have a Sukkah that falls, the schach falls up, so you pick it up and you put it on top of the Sukkah again. It's not so hard. And that's the biggest comfort that we have. Yes, it's true that the monarchy of David HaMelech is not here. We don't see the pride. But we look at it like a Sukkah's David Hanofales. It's no different than the Sukkah which has fallen down. And that's Mashiach. Mashiach will be a continuity of David HaMelech. It's not that the monarchy is gone and then suddenly we're going to have to start again with a new Mashiach and a new kingdom and so on and so forth. But what's going to happen is that it's the son of the fallen one. There's been a temporary disconnect between Mashiach and David HaMelech, but Mashiach will restore the Sukkah. He'll put the Sukkah back on top of us. He'll simply take the schach, he'll take it like the Kohen taking the ashes and finding meaning in them. And he'll be able to restore what it means to be a descendant of David HaMelech. And the truth is that this is the concept of why there is so much simcha, why v'samachta b'chagecha, of knowing how to be happy, which is such a difficult mitzvah, a commandment for a human being, be happy, is found specifically in the Sukkah. Because when a person is striving only for perfection, And the point is that everything has to be exactly, perfectly the way they would love it to be. It is extremely difficult to be happy. Oftentimes the disappointments just overwhelm us, and what we would love to see cannot happen. But when we live in the sukkah, when we live with imperfection, when we make a life out of knowing how to pick up pieces and fight back and tenaciously embrace all the fragility that life brings, well, that is exactly where simcha comes from. The idea is that we are with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and even if there are shortcomings and disappointments and challenges, we know that we can always put the schach back on top, and that is the greatest security. And that's the depth of the sukkah. The sukkah is a weak, a fragile structure, but it's a structure that we know no matter what happens is always going to last. It falls, it gets back up. And that security makes us feel like we're in the strongest place of all time. You know, it's amazing that there are many different halacha and Moshe Misinais which require a person to imagine certain things in the sukkah. Just to give an example, in the sukkah, gaps that are less than 3 tvachim are considered closed up through the principle of lavud. If I have a wall which is only 10 tvachim high, it can be imagined as if it goes higher and reaches the schach through the principle of good asik mechitza. If I have a puzzle schach on the side, we can imagine dofen akuma as if a wall can bend. If I have a wall which doesn't reach the floor, we have a principle of good achitz mechitzasa, which means that we imagine as if the wall goes down further. So on and so forth. There are more examples of this. But the point is that there are so many different halacha Moshe Misinais which validate a sukkah which doesn't seem to be kosher enough. It barely seems like there's enough of a structure. It barely seems to exist. The reality in front of you is not there. The gaps seem to be too strong. The weaknesses in the walls are there. But the halacha Moshe Misinais that do validate the sukkah require us to imagine, to believe in it, to see it differently than everybody else would see it, to redefine the reality and what does it mean to be secure and what does it mean to be vulnerable. And what seems to be the most vulnerable structure can actually symbolize the structure that is the most secure. That's the power of the sukkah, of knowing how to live with imperfection, of knowing that the Lulav and Esrog, if we're completely obsessed with it, then we're going to be disappointed with it. But to know that the sukkah can pick us up, because if we can pick up the Garin V'Yekev and put it on top of our heads and know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us, then in such a structure I can imagine that the walls are bigger than they are. And that's always been the story for us. Think about how many Batei Midrashim that we've had throughout Jewish history, how many shuls that we've seen as long-lasting, permanent structures. And then suddenly they're gone, and suddenly they disappear, but the Jewish people move on. Because the Jewish people always know how to see the wall as something else. They refuse to allow the reality of the way that the wall seems to define the wall. There's an imagination there. An imagination that a Yid could be sitting in any place in the world, but he's there with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He knows that it's temporary. He knows that whatever the wall is can be transplanted, placed somewhere else, and he can be with the same Torah, the same HaKadosh Baruch Hu in any other context. It's amazing, and we'll end with this point. The Haftorah of Parshas Chazon, when it describes the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Navi is telling us and warning us that our sins are causing everything to go down. And we're going to be abandoned and forsaken. It's going to seem like all is lost. But the example that the Navi uses when he describes someone being alone is V'nosra ba'asiyon kisukka b'karem. That we're going to be left like in one sukkah, like a booth in a vineyard. And you can imagine that. Imagine a vineyard, an empty space. And there's grapes growing and there's vines and everything, but there's one lonely booth. That's what Yerushalayim is going to be like. Yerushalayim is going to be in that same fragile state. It's going to be like a sukkah and a karim. But if you think about those words provide tremendous amount of comfort. Because think about it, you can be in a sukkah, you can have a karim, you can have wine, you can have v'samachta b'chagecha. A person can sit with a little bit of wine in a sukkah over a sukkahs. If a person is connected, and that can be the biggest simcha. So that's exactly what the sukkah is. The sukkah is an opportunity as it welcomes us into the life of vulnerability, the life of not knowing how strong our walls are, of being abandoned to a certain degree, of only having a little hut in this big, open, vast vineyard. And we don't know exactly where we stand. On the one hand, it seems like the structure might fall down at any moment. But on the other hand, we know that wherever it is, it's going to be rebuilt. And that we have security. Security with who we are as individuals, security with who we are as a people, and security that Mashiach will come and bring us back to the place that we want to be. And this is why Sukkot exactly is the perfect holiday after Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, after Yom Kippur, we've reached it. We've been forgiven. It's a clean slate. And it's a scary thing to have a clean state. It demands expectations. Now that I forgave you, what are you going to do? And what's going to happen the first time we sin? And how are we going to deal with that? And that's exactly what Sukkot tells us. It says, number one, you got to be proud of the moments of perfection. You got to be really proud of your Lulav and Sukkah. And when you shake it, even if it's just one moment, recognize how amazing perfection can be and see the beauty and all of that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us in the best of nature. But don't live with that. Live in the Sukkah. Realize that life is about living in a structure which can fall and yet be rebuilt. And with Mitzvah Hashem, with that perspective, we should be zochet to see the time when Harachman Hu Yakim Lanu as Sukkah David Hanofas.
The guys come to here and they say one word, wow. And that's exactly what we wanted. And when you come into the hallway, you see this unbelievable, beautiful building and Batei Midrashim.
The beauty of the building, I must say, it took my breath away. I sat there for the first half an hour and I was having difficulty concentrating.
Everything here is unique and a piece of art.
The architecture is brilliant, the breadth of it, the airiness. It exalts you, it brings you up.
It gives you a feeling of modern, of space, but yet it retains a certain traditional feel to it.
It's modern without being modernistic, a space where you just want to learn. I can't wait to get back into the Beis Medrash.
Our student body generally is coming from secular homes, upper middle class to upper class homes. I think that where they come to learn should be at least as beautiful as where they came from.
To walk into a building which is the equal or more than any equivalent building anywhere in the world gives the Talmidim a feeling of the importance of what they're doing in there.
Outside, the noises are loud, the lights are bright. We need to build an atmosphere which allows a person to feel comfortable despite what they might be used to. The new building has done that and so much more. The guys in Ohr Somayach, a lot of them have made really challenging life decisions to find their way here. These guys are heroes. And if anyone really deserves a nice, pristine, comfortable, spacious building, it's these guys.
There's a tremendous dynamic in the yeshiva now, a tremendous feeling of hischadshus, of newness, of expansion, of possibility.
We hope that Be'ezrat Hashem, this will continue to be a place to connect, and we'll have thousands of students, and we'll continue to do the goal of life, Kiddush Hashem.
It's a privilege to be here, to see how these guys are growing, how they transform. It's the most exciting place. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.